By the time officers reached the first address, they already knew they were dealing with someone capable of killing. What they didn't know was how many people were still in danger, or how quickly the situation was unraveling. The first 911 call came from the suspect's own brother. His voice carried the kind of urgency dispatchers rarely mistake. Joseph Manhunt had appeared outside his home armed, unpredictable, and desperate. Only a day earlier, police had issued a warrant after Joseph allegedly kidnapped his former girlfriend, assaulted her, and threatened to end her life. Since her escape, he had disappeared without leaving a trail. Officers approached the property expecting resistance. Every doorway, every window, every shadow beyond the backyard fence demanded caution. They cleared a small shed where Joseph was believed to be hiding, announcing themselves repeatedly before discovering it was empty. The search ended almost as quickly as it began. Joseph had already slipped away. Speaking with his brother afterward revealed something far more disturbing than a failed arrest. Joseph wasn't simply avoiding police. According to those closest to him, the breakup had sent his life into a rapid downward spiral. Few believed that anger would escalate this quickly, or this violently. Detectives suddenly faced a different possibility. This wasn't a fugitive trying to escape. It could be a man working through a list of people he believed had betrayed him. The warning signs became impossible to ignore before the sun had even set. Later that evening, another frightened family member called 911. This time it was Joseph's sister-in-law. Looking through her window, she watched him packing outside the house. She already knew officers were searching for him. She also knew he wasn't there by accident. By the time patrol units arrived, Joseph had disappeared once again. Security cameras in the neighborhood soon revealed he had climbed into a white Hyundai and driven away. It wasn't the behavior of someone desperately looking for a place to hide. He was still moving with purpose, and investigators couldn't tell whether he was fleeing or heading towards someone else. That uncertainty became the greatest concern. Every minute Joseph remained free meant another family somewhere had no idea he might be on his way. For several tense hours, officers searched without a confirmed sighting. Then, shortly after 1:30 a.m., a lone patrol officer spotted the white Hyundai. The moment emergency lights appeared behind him, the vehicle accelerated into the darkness before slipping out of view. Minutes later, another officer found it abandoned across active railroad tracks. The engine had gone quiet. The driver's seat was empty. With witnesses pointing toward nearby buildings, officers carefully established a perimeter while K-9 teams prepared to track him. For a brief moment, it looked as though Joseph had run out of options. He hadn't. Less than 20 minutes later, another desperate 911 call shattered that hope. A frightened woman stumbled into a nearby business covered in blood. She told officers a man had approached her car asking for a lighter. When she cracked the window open, he forced his arm inside. She fought back, and he responded by pulling a handgun and firing through the window before stealing her vehicle. She escaped with her life. The next victim might not be as fortunate. As investigators compared her description with everything they already knew, one conclusion became unavoidable. Joseph wasn't simply staying ahead of police anymore. He was becoming more desperate. And far more dangerous. The stolen sedan appeared on the highway just after 2:00 a.m. The moment an officer confirmed the license plate, every nearby patrol unit was alerted. Joseph responded exactly as investigators feared. Instead of slowing down, he pushed the car harder, weaving through traffic and forcing other drivers to scatter across the roadway. The pursuit was no longer just about catching a suspect. Every passing vehicle had become a potential casualty. Ahead of the chase, another officer positioned himself on the shoulder with spike strips. Timing would be everything. Deploy them too early, and Joseph might swerve into innocent motorists. Too late, and the opportunity would disappear. The tires struck the spikes at highway speed. For a brief moment, it looked like the pursuit might finally be over. Instead, Joseph abandoned the crippled car, sprinted across multiple lanes of traffic, vaulted a roadside fence, and disappeared into a quiet residential neighborhood where families were still asleep inside their homes. Officers rushed after him, but quickly lost sight of him among fenced backyards and narrow side streets. Every dark yard, every unlocked gate, every silent house represented another place he could be hiding, or another family that had no idea how close the danger had become. Rather than rushing blindly into the maze, the supervising sergeant made a difficult decision. Contain the neighborhood. Bring in the helicopter. No one moves until the search is coordinated. The order frustrated some officers, but experience had taught them a painful lesson. A desperate armed suspect hiding in darkness often wanted police to make the first mistake. As helicopters prepared to launch and officers sealed off nearly every exit, an unexpected sound echoed across the neighborhood. One gunshot. The radio traffic stopped almost instantly. No officer reported being hit. No resident called for help. The silence that followed was somehow even more unsettling. Investigators now knew Joseph was still inside the containment zone. What they didn't yet realize was that the single shot wasn't fired to escape. It was fired after he had already forced his way into someone's home. The search had stretched on for hours, but Joseph remained invisible. From the air, the helicopter found nothing moving between rooftops or backyards. On the ground, officers knocked on doors one after another, asking anxious homeowners to lock their windows, stay inside, and call immediately if they noticed anything unusual. Each house cleared without incident offered brief relief, yet the growing silence only made the uncertainty heavier. Sergeant Sheldon gathered his team and confronted the possibility no one wanted to admit. If Joseph wasn't outside, he might already be inside. Not hiding. Waiting. He quietly outlined the scenarios detectives now had to consider. Joseph could be sheltering inside an empty home, he could be barricaded, or far worse, he could already have innocent people under his control. Before anyone could act on those possibilities, dispatch interrupted the briefing. A terrified father had escaped from a nearby house. His wife, his 2 daughters, and his daughter's boyfriend were still trapped inside with an armed man. The neighborhood instantly transformed from a manhunt into a hostage crisis. Officers located the father only moments after his call. Fighting to stay composed, he described how Joseph had entered through an unsecured basement window before surprising the family inside. They had no warning, no opportunity to run. Upstairs, the family sat together in fearful silence, uncertain whether saying the wrong thing or simply moving at the wrong moment could cost someone their life. One daughter had remained asleep downstairs when the ordeal began, leaving officers uncertain whether Joseph even knew she was there. Specialized tactical teams were called in immediately. As commanders gathered intelligence, another unexpected development changed the equation. The daughter who had been sleeping in the basement managed to slip outside unnoticed and reach safety. Her escape confirmed something investigators had desperately needed to know. Joseph was still focused on the hostages upstairs. Commanders quickly reviewed everything they had learned over the previous 36 hours. The kidnapping, the threats, the armed carjacking, the pursuit, the gunfire. Every decision pointed toward the same conclusion. His behavior was becoming increasingly unpredictable. Negotiators prepared to establish contact, while SWAT officers quietly surrounded the home. Every decision from this point forward carried the same impossible question: how do you save innocent lives without provoking the man holding them at gunpoint? Then investigators uncovered one final detail that made the situation even more dangerous. Joseph wasn't asking for money. He wasn't demanding a vehicle. He wasn't negotiating for an escape. He simply refused to let anyone leave alive. With the house surrounded, the operation entered its most dangerous phase. Negotiators worked patiently, searching for anything that might lower Joseph's emotional state. They avoided confrontation, choosing instead to keep him talking. Hopping time itself might reduce the danger inside, but every conversation led back to the same reality. Joseph refused to release a single hostage. Negotiators eventually reached an unavoidable conclusion. Joseph no longer seemed interested in escaping. He wasn't bargaining for a way out. He was refusing to let anyone leave. SWAT commanders authorized deadly force if a clear opportunity presented itself. A sniper quietly positioned himself inside a nearby home overlooking the front entrance. Beside him, a spotter confirmed distances, sightlines, and every possible risk. One detail made the assignment even more difficult. One of the male hostages closely resembled Joseph. There would be no second chance if they identified the wrong person. Outside, almost nobody spoke, unless it was absolutely necessary. Every passing minute increased the risk that Joseph might become even more unpredictable. Inside the house, the hostages had no way of knowing how close help really was. They could only wait, trying to remain calm while every conversation, every movement, and every silence carried consequences they couldn't control. After hours of negotiation, officers persuaded Joseph to take one small step. "Come to the front door." He agreed, but only if the hostages stood with him. As the door slowly opened, the sniper settled his breathing one final time. There was no room for hesitation. No margin for error. The identities were confirmed. The hostages were clear. A single shot shattered the silence. Within seconds, the tactical team breached the house. Officers rushed through the doorway, clearing each room before pulling the frightened family to safety. After more than 6 hours trapped inside with an armed and increasingly unstable man, every surviving hostage walked out alive. Joseph was critically wounded and transporting to the hospital, where he later died despite emergency treatment. As investigators reconstructed the final 48 hours, they reached a sobering conclusion. What had begun as domestic violence escalated into kidnapping, armed threats against relatives, a violent carjacking, shots fired at a stranger, a dangerous police pursuit, and ultimately a hostage crisis that placed an entire neighborhood in danger. The investigation found no evidence of a carefully planned campaign. Instead, it revealed the rapid psychological collapse of a man whose resentment, heavy drug use, and deteriorating judgment fueled an increasingly violent chain of decisions. With each step, his options narrowed until confrontation became almost inevitable. For investigators, the case became a reminder of how quickly a targeted domestic violence incident can evolve into a public safety emergency. Throughout the search, they were rarely reacting to what Joseph had already done. They were racing to prevent what he might do next. For the family inside that house, however, none of those tactical decisions would ever define that night. They would remember the waiting, the silence, the uncertainty of not knowing whether they would ever walk back out the front door. The gunfire eventually faded. For the people who survived it, the memories never did.